I'm going to show you now another box that I've been making now for something like 15 years. It's still one of the most popular boxes that I make. This is one that I call a capsule box. I'll refer to the chart now and to show you the stages of the development. What we do first of all is take a piece of wood and turn it into a cylinder between centres. The ends are squared with a parting tool, and this piece is going to sit into a very different chuck to what I've shown you before. This is an engineer's 4-jaw self-centering chuck. The reason I use it is that it saves material and is much faster acting than the other chucks. Once that is secured in there, which doesn't secure as well as you'll find with the scroll type chucks, but is the one that I prefer to use for about 80% of what I do. Once that is achieved, we then measure the distance of the lid here and part in with a parting tool, eventually parting that all the way through to separate what will be the lid form. Once that is achieved, we remove the stock from the jaws and invert this lid into those 4 jaws. At that stage, we tool the end of here with a gouge or a skew chisel, and then hollow in here with a gouge, removing the interior and truing that up with a side cutting round nose scraper. At that stage, we then sand and polish to conclusion.
I'm roughing this down between centres again with the 3/4 inch roughing gouge, the bevel again rubbing. Flute of that tool is 45 degrees out of the vertical. You can see the fingers being used as a traverse along that tool rest. I was always cutting downhill until I'd got it into a true cylinder. Now I'm just traversing lightly along that cylinder to get a decent surface. Taking lighter cuts as I've got nearly to the surface that I require. This box is going to be made in a different chuck to what we've shown you so far, and all I need to do is to part across that end to give a slightly concave surface, and again I do the same on the other end. This cylinder will allow me to make 2 boxes, and I'm going to hold it in a 4-jaw engineer's chuck, which is self-centering. Just going to show you the movement of the self-centering 4-jaw chuck. This is an engineer's chuck, as you can see, and this chuck isn't liked by a lot of people because you can easily knock your knuckles, as you can see, as those jaws protrude outside the body. But having said that, this is the chuck that I use to make 80% of the boxes that I make. I've just been truing the little nib off the end there with the spindle gouge, and now taking final cuts again, showing you the use of the skew chisel. You could see that little wispy shaving come off like a coolie hat, and we've got an extremely good surface. Just going to true that diameter up there. With the skew, it was running slightly out of true. See, that tool comes in, the bevel is rubbing just behind the cut there. We're cutting in the lower section of the tool. If you get the heel in, you'll have a feather edge in front of the tool. This is just showing you the alternative cut. This is the gouge that I use with that long side wing angle ground on it, and this is a shearing cut, as you can see, but it has bevel support all the way through. And I've found over the years that using exotic timbers, this tool is often more preferable to use than the skew. We're now ready to mark out the proportions of this box, and in this particular one, the capsule box, we find that we have 2/5 of the overall length in the lid and 3/5 in the base. I'm going to part this lid off with the very narrowest parting tool I possess. This is only a 1/16 of an inch in width and minimises the grain mismatch. Now I part this off and catch the lid in my left hand. There you can see that that grain has torn a bit, but it doesn't matter in this instance as we're going to hollow the interior and the base. We now remove the base stock from the 4-jaw chuck and invert our lid. You can see that little nib sticking out, so that tells you that the grain will match through. We just need to true that edge. I'm using the little 3/8 spindle gouge just to go in there about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. Now that edge is clean, we now use the depth gauge, and the way I do this, I set the depth gauge on the top of those jaws, and that means there's 1/4 of an inch left in that top. We're now ready to hollow, and again we pick up our 3/8 modified spindle gouge with the short angle. We use it to bore in, and again it's about 10 or 15 degrees out of the vertical, the flute, and then we start and hollow out, and you can see that tool has gone on its back by about 45 degrees out of the vertical. With that short bevel angle, we're able to rub the bevel through the arc there until we come up that side wall, and then it becomes more of a scrape. Just checking the depth at this time. Just go in a little deeper, and then you can see that pivoting movement. It's like a fulcrum movement, basically. That short bevel allows you to tool that and get a reasonably good finish. Another pass with the gouge, getting us closer and closer to our desired form. Once that's achieved, I resort to the side cutting round nose scraper. Go into the bottom there and then just pull round that curve, removing those little ripples and undulations from the gouge. It's critical that the side wall is parallel for the first 5/16 to 3/8 at least before the curve starts, because that fits on the spigot that we cut on the base. Just checking to see if that's parallel. And now satisfied that that is tooled to the required standard, we now come to sand it. Again, I start with 150 grit wet and dry paper or silicon carbide paper dipped in paste wax. Again, this is used to minimize friction heat and aids the cutting and the sanding. Minimizes scratch marks also. I work this through the various grit, 150, 180, 240, 320 and down to 400 as a rule. When you're sanding the interior of these pieces, be very careful not to round off the aperture there, because that is the critical factor that's the fit of the lid. This time I've gone back to the 4/0 steel wool to remove any minor scratch marks from the sanding. In this box I'm going to seal it with a lacquer. Put the lacquer on the cloth, and with the lathe stationary, then I revolve it by hand just to spread that lacquer over. Once it's on, I friction dry it, spreading it round there to get an even coating. Find a dry piece of cloth and then friction dry that. Once that's done, I'll go back to the 4/0 steel wool dipped in the paste wax and use that to remove any surplus lacquer there. If you use that wire wool dry, you will pull the sealant over and get little polish rings, but if you use a lubricant, it will give you an extremely good finish. Now, with the lathe still rotating, I go in there and spread a good layer of a high quality finishing wax. This has got some dryers in it, which means it friction dries very quickly and gives you a good finish. You can see there that it's a satin finish rather than the very high gloss finish, which I don't really like.
What we're going to do now on this next set of drawings is to show you the progressive development of this box. What we've done so far is to achieve the interior of the lid. What we do now is to replace the stock into the chuck and cut a spigot on here to fit the lid to. This will be parallel, internal in the lid and parallel on the spigot there. Once this is a nice friction fit, we can then start and cut the profile of the outside of the box. We've parted in here a slight way with a parting tool, having defined our length. There'll be 2/5 of the overall body in the lid and 3/5 in the base. Once we've got that profile done, we then remove the lid. The next stage that we do is to cut a little detail step line here, that's shown in this detail blown up here, with a parting tool. This just defines the lid from the base and camouflages any slight mismatch of the grain. Once that has been done, we just true the end here with the point of a gouge or a parting tool or a skew chisel, and then we go internally here with the spindle gouge and hollow this out. Once the mass has been removed, we true that surface up with the side cut-in round nose scraper. Once that has been achieved, we then place the lid back on here, and we finally shape the base here. We've left this a little heavier in the development there, so we just make this base a little bit smaller. Once that has been achieved, we then sand the whole of the exterior up and apply whatever polish or sealant we want to do. After that has been done, we remove the lid and sand the interior to conclusion, and again applying your polish and sealers, whichever you want to do. Once that is done, we're now ready to part this box off. We take a small parting tool, part almost through, and then cut with a saw. What we're left with is another piece of wood that we can make another box from, and the same procedures are followed to make that one.
The interior of that lid is now completed, so we remove that from the chuck. And we pick up the body to replace in there, which we're going to make our base from. This is not seating down exactly right. You can see it running slightly out of true. If I put a pencil line there, we'll see that that is only hitting in one spot. Sometimes this timber's reasonably soft and the jaws embed themselves in there a little and pull it out of true. Just revolving it in that stock. See, it's still not running true. So just tap it with the heel of my hand there, and then we'll see if we've got it right. We've now got that running true. Put a continuous pencil line round there. We're now in a position to proceed and tool the end of this piece. Just using the skew chisel here to clean that end there. That will form the top of our spigot. Now with the 3/8 beading parting tool, I'm going to create the spigot on here. This time I'm working as I normally do within the workshop, without measuring instruments. I do all this by visual means. I just look at the piece and judge the wall thickness and take the tool and part this down. This is what happens when you've made thousands of these pieces, as I have over the years. Measuring instruments become less used. You can visually gauge this. The fit of the lid actually is almost unmeasurable in any case. It's very much a trial and error factor, as you can see, but usually I get this to fit on about the third occasion of trying it. Just parting that down, and it's almost fitting now. I'm just going to lengthen that spigot a little. We should be close to getting this to fit. That's the sort of fit that we're looking for. It's friction held now. I have to remove it with two hands. I'm just going to remove that little step there where I went fractionally small. Just lengthen the spigot just enough. The spigots I usually use are between 3/16 of an inch long and 1/4 of an inch long on pieces of this size. Now I'm going to measure the overall length of this piece to divide this up, and basically there'll be 2/5 of the overall size in the lid and 3/5 in the base. I'm just parting in here with a 1/16 of an inch parting tool, going in about 3/8 deep. Now I need to true this cylinder slightly. There's a slight mismatch between the base and the lid, and I'm using the heel of the skew chisel to do this. I always cut from the base of the box towards the lid, which means that that has to be a good friction fit. I always find this is the easiest way to approach it. Now I've got that cylinder true, we can start and shape the capsule form. Using the fingernail gouge, as you can see, to roll that radius. As it goes around the top surface, the flute of that gouge becomes a lot more vertical as I go across the top. Now I've removed the mass from the top, I start and remove a great deal of the material from the bottom. I don't shape this to final conclusion, but I want this to be heavier to give support while I'm hollowing the interior. Just deepening that slot a little more with the 16th parting tool. Now I'm starting to roll the radius at the top using the 3/8 beading tool. This tool, as you can see, I use a great deal and use it like a skew chisel. It removes those undulations that I've created with the gouge. Now I've gone back to using that little short gouge that I use with the bolt angle inside. It's only a 60 to 65 degree angle on this tool, and I use it both ways, and because I've got that long angle on the side, I can make that shearing cut through there with the bevel support. And often I find that on these dense woods that you can get a better finish than taking that round with the skew. I've always found it an easier tool to handle when you're working on surfaces where it's hollow inside. This wall thickness, don't forget, is no more than 3/16 of an inch, if that at this stage. Picked up the skew now, using the point to form more of the shape at the bottom here, reducing that diameter down, getting closer to the profile that we're aiming for, but still leaving it a little heavier at this time, but we're getting closer. Positive movements, the bevel always rubbing. If you don't, you're going to be in trouble. The outside form is almost complete. We're just making the final refining cut. I don't like to rely on abrasive paper to shape the work. It should be, as far as I'm concerned, to shape from the tool. And we've got a fairly good curve there, as you can see. I'm just checking it to see if there's any uneven surfaces there, and it looked fairly good. Now I've removed the lid, I've decided that the outside form is where I want it. I'm just going to create the little gap line in there. And I used the 3/8 beading parting tool to incise in there about a 1/16 of an inch deep and about a 1/16 of an inch wide. And that should be in proportion for the size of the box we're making. I just fit the lid to check that that looks right, and that looks fine to me. Now I need to check the depth for hollowing the interior. Now I leave about 3/16 of an inch in the bottom of this piece. We're now ready to hollow our base, and we take the 3/8 modified spindle gouge, go in through the centre there, form a little hole, and then we start and pivot out. The boring is done with the gouge 10 to 15 degrees out of the vertical, and then the hollowing, when you're coming back up there, bevel is 45 degrees out of the vertical. You bear that in mind when you're working hollowing the methods that I use, you won't get yourself into too much trouble. Got to remember that this is a pivoting cut. If you put a pin in that rest, drill a hole in the rest and put a pin there, you'd almost pivot on it like a fulcrum. The fingers have now gone outside as that wall is getting thinner to absorb any vibration through the piece. Just checking to see the depth. To go deeper. We're opening that back up. I'm still able to get bevel support as I'm coming round there because of that very short angle that I've got on the end of this tool. Because I'm now ready to finally refine the inside of that with the side cutting round nose scraper. The rest is above centre height to allow that tool to tilt down about 10 to 15 degrees out of the horizontal. Now I'm just lightly refining the interior. Again, the fingers are outside, supporting, the thumb's on top of that tool. All the manipulation of this tool takes place with the right hand on the handle. Just showing you the movement there, so as you can see it without the shavings hiding the blade. Now we'll just take the final finishing cuts. Again, the fingers are outside supporting the wall. And just softening the aperture there, or the opening. Satisfied the interior is complete of the tooling. Now we need to shape the final base area of this piece. So I'm going in with the 16th parting tool to give myself space to go in there with the long point of the skew chisel. Just rounding this in here. Make this base smaller so that it's more in proportion to the rest of the piece. It was left heavier so that it gave the support while we were dealing with the hollowing. Now I'm happy with that. We put the lid back on to make sure that the overall profile is correct. Well, now I'm satisfied, we'll go through the sanding procedure. Again, we've gone with the 150 grit abrasive, dipped into the wax to act as the lubricant to minimise the friction heat. And we go through this system all the way through using 180, 240, 320 and down to 400 grit. Foro steel wool now comes in with wax on it to minimise the friction heat again and remove any little fine scratches that we put in with the abrasive. The exterior sanded to conclusion, so we remove the lid and start and go through the same methods again on the interior. Starting again on the 150 grit, dipped in the paste wax, starting from the base of the box and sanding up there, making a good smooth finish internally there. As far as I'm concerned, the interior of this piece should be exactly the same quality as the exterior. Just sanding lightly in that little recess line. It's always best done on the upward thrust of the lathe when you've got a little detail like that. One thing you don't want to do is to sand that spigot shoulder, as that is the precise fit direct from the tool. If you start and sand that, the lid will become loose. Now I'm just putting the sealer on here. This is a lacquer sealer. Dip this into the sealant, and now I'm just burnishing it dry on the cloth there. Remove that, and we'll put some of the sealant inside and revolve the lathe by hand and spread the lacquer over that piece. Just get an even coating of it. Now start the lathe and just friction dry it. Just put a little bit in that step line, but not onto the spigot itself. Just continuing to friction dry there. Replace the lid. The foro steel wool, dipped in the paste wax again, will remove any surplus sealer that's there. The sealer's there to give a better finish on these softer woods. On the very dense exotics, I don't normally use a sealant at all these days. The quality of the paste waxes that have been developed in recent years is sufficient, and the density of that wood, if it loses its gloss, if you just buff it on a soft cloth, it'll come back as though it had just come off the lathe. I usually spread some polish just on that spigot, just so as it matches the same colour as the rest of the piece. But remember that you shouldn't sand it, it should just be straight from the tool. Put it back together now. It looks almost there. Just spreading a little wax on the outside there. We'll start the lathe and polish that to conclusion. Got a nice satin sheen emerging on it now. Remove the lid, just polishing in that last area there. It's now almost finished from parting this box away from the remaining stock. See that it's a very minimal amount of wastage there by using this 16th-inch parting tool. Going in there to leave a tenon of about 3/8 to half an inch. And I shall cut this off with the saw. Remember, this is for safety reasons and not to tear the grain. Remove that, as you can see. So now we just need to tool that bottom. We've put a waste block into the chuck. I'm just cutting a spigot on there which will fit inside the base of this piece. We're pretty close first time. Just make that longer so it penetrates deeper into the box beyond the projection of the spigot. Then it will give it much more support. That's a nice snug fit on there. We can now tool the bottom. Small spindle gouge again comes into play. I'm just making that slightly concave so as it won't rock. Bevel rubs behind that tool all the time. I'm just going to lead that in a little more. That base is a little bit large, and if you get that problem, this is the time you can rectify it, when it's on that spigot chuck. Just made it that bit smaller, and it will make it more aesthetically pleasing. I'm happy with the tool work, so now I just sand these areas up that need refining. Going back through the various grades of abrasive again. Just going to take a look at it now. The lid fit is acceptable. I'm just looking at the aesthetic form of the piece to see if that's satisfying. The curves look pretty even, there isn't any broken lines there or anything, and the surface key is of quality that I'm quite happy to accept, and it looks a fairly successful conclusion to that piece. I'm now going to show you the making of the second box from that cylinder of timber, and remember, this is the way that I normally work. Just trued the end up. Now I'm going to part the lid off with the narrowest parting tool. This 1/16 of an inch parting tool. This is going to be a little stubby box, as you can see. I'm parting all the way through and catching that in my left hand. Once that's done, remove the waste piece, or what is the piece that's going to make the base, from the chuck. And we invert the piece that is going to be our lid. This little box is one that I call the coolie box. So I now need to form the inside of the lid. Okay, we just tool in with that little gouge from the edge here. Get a good clean surface. Now we start to hollow. Just doing this straight from the tool. There's not going to be any sanding or anything. It's just to show you the methods used, showing you from a different angle. Just moving the rest away a little and up to use the scraper to refine the interior of that. This is the round nose side cutting scraper. You can see it tilting down out of the horizontal about 10 or 15 degrees and cutting on centre height. Just removing the little nib in the bottom there. Now with the 3/8 beading tool, I'm just cutting a straight incise line in there. This is for the spigot of the base to fit in. I leave a little step in the lid of these type of boxes because when you cut the outside form, if you follow that all the way through, the thickness would be a little bit too thin and be weak. So this just gives you a little bit of extra material. We're now inverting the base in here, and I need to cut a small tenon or spigot on the end of here. This will only be about 1/8 of an inch long, and this means that we save a lot of timber by using this method. The way I make boxes, that you can see here, if I relied purely on using the 4-jaw chuck, I would be losing about 1/2 inch of material or greater. I think by using the methods that I do, I probably make another 30 or 40 boxes a year from timber that would be on the floor normally in waste shavings. Putting the scroll chuck back in. The spindle of the lathe is locked. Just opening the jaws out and closing down onto that spigot, making sure it's nice and tight. Remove the spindle lock and we're now ready to move on. See, it's going to be a very small, stubby, short little box. Just pointing out to you now that I need to cut a little spigot on here to fit the lid before hollowing. Just creating that spigot with the 3/8 beading parting tool. Just checking it again by eye, no measuring implements are used. This is the way I normally work. I've satisfied myself that the lid fits, so now I'm going to start and put some of the shape into the base here. Using the little 3/8 spindle gouge again, being careful there because I'm very close to those jaws. Just lifted the rest so as I can use that 3/8 beading parting tool like a skew chisel to roll that corner softer, and removing the ripples from the gouge. The lid on now, and now I'll start and form the shape of the top of this box. It'll all be done with the 3/8 spindle gouge. Moving that corner, take those cuts light at this stage as it's a friction hold. If you're too aggressive you can knock it off. As we're getting nearer and nearer the form, you can start and cut a little bit more aggressively. When you're nearer the shape, then of course the cuts become lighter again. You're very close to the profile that you're looking for. I should be able to run down this surface all the way and make a very good surface of this just from the gouge. If you run that bevel behind, particularly on timber of this nature, which is working very nicely under the tool without too much resistance, you're able to get a lovely clean cut there. You can see that little coolie hat shape emerging there. It's ready to come off, and you can see the profile of it now, the real little coolie hat form. It's time to start hollowing again with our modified spindle gouge, boring in, then starting to hollow out. Just checking for depth. Removing some more material. You'll find that with that short stubby angle used in that method, you can go across the bottom of that piece with the bevel supporting the cut. I just need to true the interior of this box up, and I'm using the square across side cutting end cutting scraper. You can see across the bottom and just in that shoulder. This will allow me to get most of that true. Now I need to get back under that curve, and I'm using that little modified swan neck scraper that I have. That just gets me underneath that shoulder into that more bulbous form. Just checking it. Just replacing the lid, and that's finished from the tool at this time internally, and the lid is formed. I need now to reverse turn this base, so got to cut a spigot or a tenon on a waste block to fit the base over. I usually use a wood which is slightly softer than the material I'm using. I always find that it grips better. It's a coarser grain, and it grips better than if you use two timbers of equal density. Just taking the final shaving off there to fit the base on. That's a good push fit. Snug fit there. So now I can tool the bottom off here. It's quite a projection there, as you can see, from that spigot, and we've got that little core there I'll take it all off with the 3/8 spindle going. This is much easier than any other tool to remove material. You get less resistance there. Going to make this slightly concave. And that base at the moment is a little bit too large, so with the little gouge, removing material to make that diameter smaller, to make the piece much more fluid and aesthetically pleasing. With that little 3/8 beading parting tool, I'm softening that round to get rid of the little ripples, undulations, and just making that a very nice soft curve there. And that base looks finished, so we'll remove it from the chuck and we'll fit the lid. We're not sanding this, we're just showing you so you see the action without it being broken as we've done through the rest of the videos. Just put the base of the box back onto our spigot waste block here, because I'm just a little unhappy about the fit of the lid. It's just a little bit too tight, so with the little 8 parting tool I'm just easing a fraction off there.
That's just a good commentary.
And hopefully that'll be a much better fit. Remember, this hasn't been sanded, polished or oiled or anything done to it. I've just mentioned oil there, and oil is a material that I never use on boxes. I find that it deadens the grain. I like the things to be polished rather than a soft matte finish. I like that satin sheen. And with oils, normally it doesn't give as good a finish on small pieces of this nature. Just showing you here now that we took 2 boxes from 1 cylinder of wood. This was about 5.5 inches long and about 2.5 inches in diameter.
Box making is very challenging and demands a high level of skill, but with practice you can have fun and enjoyment. Select yourself a piece of special timber and go and give it a try.